So with climate change, one big thing we tend to see is heavy rainfall and unpredicted types of weather. So in the past 50 years, we have seen a 15% increase in rainfall, and this causes many, bad things to happen throughout the city. So heavy downpours are expected for the next several years, and you might be wondering, well, where is this coming from? Why is this happening? And one big thing people think about when they think about climate change is warming of the earth, which is true. So because of that, warm air tends to have more water vapor. And water vapor has to go somewhere, and through the water cycle, obviously, goes up into the air, condenses, makes clouds, which means there's more chances for storms to occur. And this is one example of a bad thing happening from this is unexpected weather and extreme weathers can, impact vulnerable people like old people and children in a bad way.
Another effect of climate change is on agriculture. So the warmer temps that we tend to see because of climate change are going to increase the growing season in most parts of the world. That just means that we can plant crops earlier and that they will grow and we can harvest them earlier as well sometimes. And now as a result, in places that used to be colder, crops like corn and soybeans are able to be grown because of the warmer temperatures we see. And then in addition, wheat yields are also reduced because of the pests that grow during the warmer winters because of climate change. Yeah.
The third area that climate change impacts is human health. Climate change equates to fluctuations in weather, so more extreme temperatures. This is bad, especially for the sick, the old, and the young, and the poor. External temperatures make it much more difficult for these groups of people to regulate their internal conditions, so especially with things like heart problems or breathing problems. Some of the potential risk factors are heart problems, like I said before, allergies. One example is ragweed that produces a huge amount of pollen, and climate change would lengthen its maturation cycle, so that means more pollen. Inability to afford temperature regulation, like air conditioners, for example, that especially impacts the poor. One upside is that there's going to be less extremely cold days, so that would increase complications from conditions such as hypothermia.
Ecosystems are also affected, especially by climate change. The rising CO2 levels, they do increase productivity, which is typically good, but when it is such an increase that it affects the relationships between the animals, then that's what is unexpected and what will harm the ecosystem. It is only beneficial short term and especially disrupts the behavior of the animals. For example, birds migrate earlier to the south as it gets colder earlier. So these animals that are usually eaten by the birds, where it balances out the cycle, they are allowed to propagate and reproduce, and that affects the ecosystem immensely as they take away the food source that may move up in the chain, which it's not allowed to do. It also affects the predator-prey relationships by making it that the prey is larger than the predator source because the predators don't have enough food, and it grows in a way that is harmful towards the ecosystem. Noxious plants like invasive plants and weeds are allowed to reproduce as these relationships are disrupted, and they are allowed to take hold and prosper, whereas the native ones are not.
Can you mention any economic benefits and costs that the climate change might impact on Minot?
I think that's a good thing for the agriculture experts to answer.
Yeah, so regarding agriculture, since more crops are going to be able to be grown due to the warmer temps, we can see a more diversified economic source from these crops, meaning that we are able to get more revenue, but also our wheat yields are also reduced, which means that it's kind of a canceling out effect where it's not necessarily a certain increase, certain decrease because of climate change.
Anybody else? Economic effects?
I suppose inside the city, human health could potentially aid it just because of things like hospital costs or purchasing different equipment, that money would circulate throughout the town.
And
Yeah, I mean, the unexpected weathers, and we see more rainfall. We can see likelihoods of floods, and big blizzards and stuff could damaged parts of the city with accidents and everything being able to happen. Obviously, that's gonna cost the city to, you know, rebuild things or fix things after big damages such as that. So that would be one economical effect that we would have to face.
Last thing I'd like you to comment on is Minot schools. So do you still think Minot has schools as a selling point? And do you think the schools will be impacted by climate change?
What do you mean by schools as a cell?
Like, are schools good here or schools bad? Is this a good place to bring a family and then say you're going to be in a public school here, where in some places you can't attend a public school because you don't know that it's a good school?
I would say that the public school system here is very firm in a good way, which means more solid education and more paths for students to follow. The climate change, because North Dakota is farther up north, I don't think that climate change will impact this state as much as it would some of the southern states, especially since with climate change comes a more regular source of water. Do you have anything to add on that?
And then regarding, I mean, maybe if you're asking about climate change in regards to education within the schools, maybe climate change education might be something that we're not going to see much of up here because of how the effects of climate change aren't as noticeable here compared to, say, on the coast with rising sea levels, or even in the south with really, really hot summers.
All right, thank you very much. 6 minutes, 40 seconds.